recording. There we go. We just changed on the hour. Start streaming. Let's snap. There we go. That's going. My connection is not good, but whatever. That's fine. The recording will go up on YouTube. That's all that really matters. Sorry, people on Twitch. So, for anyone out there and future audiences, we're back. Interview 10. Who are you?
My name is Jared Sinclair, and I guess I'm a game designer now, so that's fun.
You are?
Yeah, Jared.
Yeah, Jared.
That's
cool.
me.
Jared, who is a game designer now.
Yeah.
So, I feel like that doesn't do you justice. But also, it's like not really a useful descriptor for you. Like, it is technically true and tells me nothing. So
I think I tweeted that the other day.
It's fair. Probably. That sounds like some shit you tweet.
Yeah.
So, I will say that my introduction to you and the way that I still primarily think about you is not through necessarily your design work, although we will touch on things like anti-cis, where, like, yeah, I definitely do consider that, but I think of you occupying, like, the, probably the more, criticism-oriented space, right? Like, you make the thing, but so much of your output ends up being critical work rather than, like, creative work, which we can probably get into an argument over the distinction there.
Yeah.
But, like,
I mean, that's been true of me in past lives as well. I tend to be really interested in thinking about the thing
sure.
rather than doing the thing. You know, like even when I was I have a poetry degree, and so even when I was writing poems, it was much more about like exploring poetics than anything, if that makes sense. And so I feel like I'm just doing that same shit that I've always done. And it ends up looking very much like theory, but I don't know.
Well, I mean, you do have output, right? You're not just out there writing think pieces on Medium, or like only tweeting, right? You have stuff up on Itch. You have things that are games.
Especially recently, yeah.
Especially recently. You also do work with Dan Sell and Melsonia, right?
Yeah. So I've been doing the social media stuff for Melsonia since last August, since Gen Con. Gen Con was my first day.
Okay.
So that was a fun like jump into it. The innies. I got to live tweet the innies as my first night on the job. And you know, I've sort of picked up a few things here and there on the back end with Melsonia, so that's been good. And I've done some editing work as well, sort of on my own. So the big one is recently I edited Spy in the House of F by Zedek CU for Soul Muppet. So that's coming out anytime now. I think the PDF is out. The books will be out soon enough.
Yeah, I actually think I have the PDF. I haven't read it yet.
It's great.
Yeah, it looks good. And honestly, I've yet to be disappointed by a single thing Zedek's ever done. So, like, like there will come a day, and it will be a sad day, and I don't think it is yet. So yeah, I mean, I want to say I started being aware of you as like an individual in the scene probably about a year ago.
That would have been about when I started on the scene, to be perfectly honest. Before that, I was more a board games person.
Yeah.
On the internet. And then about a year ago, it would have been just over a year ago, I shitposted a 200-word RPG. That was my first RPG. Waiting for Godot, the role-playing game. Mm-hmm. And so I just tweeted it. I made it an image and tweeted it. And that's still my biggest tweet. It had like, I don't know, 200 retweets. Wow. And so then I became a game designer after that, I guess.
That's all it takes.
Yeah, you just chase some praise. I think that's how most of a good chunk of people end up doing whatever they do. Is they get praised for it one time, you know?
And it's just like, oh, that's rad, right? Like,
mm-hmm.
I think about Levon, Cecil's friend who works at Cartoon Network, and his first RPG, Fuck It's Dracula, which was just like a 200-page RPG that he threw up, and that was his first thing, and it was just like so positively received. It's like, shit, I guess I do games things now.
And Fuck It's Dracula is great.
It's good. It's such a good name. I'm so mad that it's only a 200-page RPG because it does like I want like a full book that just did Fuck It's Dracula on it.
Right.
So yeah, I feel like we kind of didn't interact very much until fairly recently. Like I was aware of you. I followed you on Twitter. We had mutuals, but we like had never had much cause to interact. We both do kind of like the thinking about versus doing the thing dance.
Yeah.
But we have fairly different opinions on the thinking about things part.
I think so. I mean, we've talked a good bit
We
about that particular issue, and I think ultimately we're actually mostly in agreement. I think we have different categories for getting there.
Yeah,
but
I think when we
like radically different categories for getting there.
Yeah, when we spend enough time talking to one another, we usually arrive at like, oh shit, we were talking about the same thing. And it takes like a 2-hour debate to get there. But that's not that uncommon for me. But then more recently, we are in a Discord, and we end up talking quite a good deal. So this is actually going to be an interesting one because I think even more so than when I talked to Dave Cox, I talk to you more frequently than anyone else I've interviewed thus far.
Oh, interesting. Yeah.
So this'll be a neat, like, how do you navigate an interesting conversation when you've probably already had the conversation before?
Yeah, that's the thing.
Yeah. I guess this is why you can't be too close to your interview subjects. So yeah, I feel like we've got a few different avenues we can take. We can talk about the industry, things that we see changing, what we'd like to see changing, which is a conversation we've had before. We can talk about the theory practice divide and how we can close that and what are interesting theoretical lines to pursue and how they might inform future practice. We can talk about board game shit, which is a conversation we definitely did touch on, how like you really like 18xx games.
Yeah.
And like that's rad shit because that's part of my life as well. I think
I'm weird about board games versus RPGs. I'm a different person in board games than I am in RPGs.
Totally get it.
Like RPGs, I'm notoriously anti-system. I don't want any rules, nothing. Like we know how to do this, right? And in board games, it's like, no, I'm here to win, and we need rules so that I can use them to win. And I'm hyper competitive.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
Yeah.
I've said before that some of my favorite games are games that are fundamentally board games with so many systems attached that you can't feasibly run them all, and they have to be automated, so they become video games. Like that's the level of mechanization. I want to have multiple people's brains running to control a single side. Like Campaign for North Africa is in some ways my ideal.
Yeah. Did I tell you I messaged with that guy, like emailed with that guy?
Yeah, you did.
I forgot his name.
I can look that up.
I really should know. But I found out that he lives in South Carolina, which he wasn't that far away from where I was living at the time.
Richard
I was in
Berg.
Charleston. Richard Berg, yeah. I get him confused with Richard Borg because their names are one letter apart. But yeah, so anyway, I found out that he lives very near me in South Carolina at the time.
Okay.
And I just sent him a Board Game Geek message that was like, hey, I think you're cool, and you live near me, so that's cool too. How do you feel about that? Like, that level of nonsense.
A 12-year-old who gets on their parents like Tinder.
Yeah. Basically like Chris Farley interviewing Paul McCartney. You know what I'm talking about?
Yep. Exactly that.
So anyway, he messaged back and he was really sweet, and we like kind of scheduled a time for me to just come up and eat him, but it never happened, I think. But yeah, That's one of those weird small industry things, I guess.
That it happens
Um,
all the time. It's just
mhm.
like you're like, oh man, this is a successful designer, and I'm like, that's just a dude.
Yeah, it's just a dude who makes probably the same amount of money you do,
Yeah, like that's he
or
has
less.
he doesn't have like some special skills. He has an affliction. Um, you
Yeah,
like the tone you should adopt is one that you should adopt when you go to a leper colony. Um, like treat them like a person, but know they're suffering. Um,
they're a broken person.
yeah, exactly. Um,
That's why they make stuff.
that's why they make games. You don't make Campaign for North Africa if you have like a healthy, functioning life. Uh, you're a happy person. No, you would just go outside. Um,
So let me ask you on this theory praxis divide thing.
sure.
I've been thinking about it while we were chatting. I was thinking about it. Have you read Anti Sisyphus?
I have all of it, and I think I've read the first three.
Okay, so that's an interesting place to be actually,
Okay.
because three is where it starts to like drift pretty heavily,
Hmm.
and it only gets more three as you go. I
Okay.
think, if that makes sense, because the first two are still pretty grounded.
Yeah. Yeah, they are.
Like they have a thesis and there's like game stuff in there. And three is where it starts to be like, I don't know if this has a thesis or game stuff in it. What is this?
Yeah.
Um, so
Maybe. What?
that's I'm always fascinated by how people respond to anti-Sisyphus, because like I don't feel like I have any answers for people.
Sure.
you know, like I just write the thing, and it's part of like a process, I guess, for me to work through stuff. And I do feel like I come out of it knowing something that I didn't before, even if I can't say it different. Um, but it's always fun to me to hear people sort of assert that they understand anti-Sisyphus to some degree, and it's like, great, tell me about
Cool.
it.
Yeah, like please explain it to me.
Yeah, for real.
I don't know. I mean, there's a school of like thought about critical work that like actually that's a good thing. Um,
Yeah,
I don't know.
100%. It's definitely not a systematic explanation of any kind
Yeah.
of like static position.
Yeah, and
There is none of that in there.
we have talked about this many a time. You are a continental guy. I am a hard, like Russell style logic guy. So we are definitely at opposite ends of this. You give me a
Yeah.
600-page book that like really goes into one axiom, and I'm thrilled. That's great. Um, I don't need deep thoughts. I just need like something that holds up. Um,
But yeah, I think anti-Sisyphus for me, and this is like, I have a very particular relationship to anti-Sisyphus, as you might imagine. But for me, it's very much like a, a practical artifact of a theoretical action, if that makes sense. Like it's the
okay.
residue of me doing theory. And I think that I don't know, that gives it its tenor to some degree. And I think it's also why people are simultaneously kind of like attracted and repulsed by it.
So
Um,
if antithesis is the residue of the work, what is the work?
that's a good question. I mean, like for me, it's figuring out. Like I have a handful of pretty big questions that I ask myself quite a lot,
Okay.
and one of them that comes up over and over again is, what is the job of the game designer, right?
Sure.
And I started asking myself that question around the same time that I started becoming more and more skeptical of systems. And I think systems are, I can make a lot of claims about systems that sound really negative, but overall, I'm pretty skeptical about them. We'll leave it at that for now, at least. And so if we start to elide system, what is the job of the game designer, right? So then that question
Sure.
suddenly takes on an existential bent, and it's like it becomes this like insistent refrain of like, okay, yeah, you can, yeah, like Jared, you can say these things about systems, but also you're out here like designing games. So what does that mean? And so working through that question is a big part of anti-Sisyphus. I think issue 5. I want to say 5. Yeah, is issue 5 is like really tackling that head on. It frames itself as being a guest issue written by Protagoras, ancient sophist. But it basically like it goes back and forth about what is, and it also plays really, Anti-Sisyphus broadly plays really fast and loose with what is a player, what is a GM, what is a game designer, and how do those things intersect, right?
Mm-hmm.
So it's super all over the place on the language front. So issue 5 is where kind of it starts out, and the speaker, who is both me and Protagoras, is talking about being a player, and then suddenly becomes a game designer, and also becomes a person who's trying to kill the game designer, and then like steps back from that.
Okay.
And says, and then the last sentence of it is something like, Augustine said, "Love God and do what you will. I say to you now," to you meaning like to the game designer,
Sure.
"I say to you now, know that I exist and live," right? So it's this like threat that's just out there, and then game designers have to design anyway, right? And so what is that? What do we do now? Is always a big question, and I think Anti-Sisyphus is like me working through those questions. And it's especially rife for me, being, as I said, very system skeptical, as a person who mostly makes systems.
Sure.
Right? I don't do adventures and settings very often, or really at all.
Yeah, I mean, I think the lay person, the simpleton's answer is like, what is there to do if not, like, I don't know, setting?
Yeah.
But like, like as a more complicated and deeper question, like if you are kind of inherently always doing something mechanical, right? And I'd argue that like an adventure or a book that has no system whatsoever isn't novel. Is not a like it's a maybe a very weirdly written novel, right? Like maybe a novel closer to like House of Leaves or something. But
so like here's where we get into language issues, right? Because I'm definitely at a point where I'm really skeptical of using the word game to refer to a game text.
Okay.
Specifically because I'm skeptical of system.
Sure.
Right? And insofar as system is reducible to text, that is definitely in my, at least in the way I conceive of things.
Is system reducible to text?
Maybe text and system are very closely tied.
Sure.
In like our game design imaginary.
But
right?
like there's a pretty vast distinction between the degree to which they're connected and like their inseparability.
100%. But we are talking about books here, right? So
sure.
So insofar as so that whatever kind of system a text represents, right?
Okay.
That kind of system.
So system as like not like knowledge handed down on Mount Sinai, right?
Yeah, like system as something that you can, something that exists outside of play, right? So something that exists in a book.
So then we have another like problem, right? Like right off the bat, because now you're saying that the act of reading cannot be interpreted as a form of play.
No, that's okay. Yes, we're getting really deep in the shit here. So 100% reading is play. Reading can be play, right?
But if reading can be play, then the system in the book
is only a game if it's read. There's a difference between a book and a reading. Reading is different than a book. Okay, so reading is play, a book is not play. Therefore, in my estimation, reading is a game, or can be, and a book is not.
Sure. The physical object absent input cannot be a game. Mm-hmm. The type of input into the object can be wider than what we interpret as normal play for it to be play. Okay, sure.
The book requires a subject in order to be a game. Okay. So I think that's a really important distinction to me, and it's one that gets elided a lot, especially in.
Sure.
I don't want to sound derogatory, but especially in story game circles, I think this is something that's really important, but also not acknowledged most of the time. I think there's also a really fuzzy sort of uh, through line, a really fuzzy chain of consequence or cause and effect
Mm-hmm.
leading from the designer through the book to the actual play of the game. And I think there's very it gets so diluted by the time you play the game that it's almost meaningless to say that you're designing a game when you write a book, if that makes sense. Um,
Okay, walk that back.
okay,
How do you
so
get from the elision, which I agree exists and is problematic,
mhm.
to the like pretty axiomatic declarative statement you just made?
Sure. So, and I will couch this a little bit in this is how I conceive of my relationship to the eventual player, right? So
Sure.
this is sort of an idiosyncratic, perhaps, way of dealing with this. But um, I'll say it this way. So it's I do not like the idea, and I don't think it's true for, or I don't like to think that it's true for me that writing a game text
Uh-huh.
has any direct or sort of coercive influence on how the game comes to be, the game being the play in this
Okay. Oh wow,
formulation.
wow, wow. Okay, now we have a weird equivalency that you just introduced. The
Okay,
game
hit me.
is the play,
Yeah, that's where I've been getting this whole time. Yeah. A game doesn't exist except in play.
but then game doesn't exist, right? Then you just say it's play, right? If the only
Perhaps.
or is there play that is game that is distinct from other types of play? Is that the distinction?
I mean, it's all language stuff, right? So we can use the word game for whatever we want to use it for. The reason why I'm really against the like game as a terminology right now
Sure.
is because it doesn't get separated from play. And I think this is maybe the missing part where I jumped over some stuff a minute ago,
Okay.
where I think what our colloquial use of the word game is closer to what I would call play,
Sure.
right?
Totally agreed on that.
And when we say game, we tend to refer to play, but somehow divorced from play, right? We like carve out this
I mean,
necessary element
it is a
of play.
it is a tool that is not in and of itself play that can enable or enhance play, right?
Sure, it has a relationship to play certainly, and it
I mean, I
can
think this
frame
is
play.
this is where like I'm having my biggest issue with what you're putting out so far, not your output, like just this argument, this discussion.
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
Um,
yeah, yeah.
is I think there's a very big difference between saying that the category game is materially equivalent to the category play than saying that in their colloquial usage there's basically no distinction, right? Um,
Mm-hmm.
like their play a play object is not play, right? Like,
Mm-hmm.
and this is just like old game study stuff, right? Like
Toy is not play. Yeah,
a toy is not play.
yeah.
Um, a toy can enable play, but play can exist without toy.
Mm-hmm.
Um, that is the space game occupies.
Yeah, I think games are toys, absolutely. But
Sure.
I think I guess the argument I'm making here, if I can reframe myself and replace previous things that I've said,
Go ahead.
um, perhaps the argument I'm making here is that we don't do a good job culturally keeping that in mind, right? And I think that has big implications for what the job of the game designer is, right? If we're toy makers,
Sure. Okay.
that is very different than what gets implied by the phrase game designer.
Yes. Agreed.
And so I'm doing my very best to be a toy maker.
Okay.
Right?
Okay. So I think that is a much I think it's a much more cogent framing, but
Yeah.
two, it's also like a much more helpful framing because
Mm-hmm.
it posits that like, hey, it's not it says game designer and toy maker are actually materially different things. And you are doing a less effective job of facilitating the creative play you aspire to facilitate by thinking of yourself in this privileged position of game designer versus the more accurate position of toy maker.
Yeah, at least in my formulation and like how I want to live my life, that is definitely
Yeah,
that's a set of things that I've adopted for myself. I'm very careful these days with trying to tell other people how to live their lives.
sure. Um, I am
But
not,
yes,
but
absolutely, sure. I'm learning.
yeah. No, I mean, I think that gives you, right. Like, I think if you're the initial form of the argument you put forward is one that's is very much on like small definitional differences, and so harder for a lot of people who you might be trying to actually convert to grasp.
100.
Um,
This is like my whole life because I spend my life in that. That's where I learn stuff is
sure.
in the nitty gritty and the strange and the like. Now let's go to outer space for a second and
Yeah.
see how it all fits together. And communicating that is like basically impossible, except with a very small number of people.
I get it.
So I have to do these things like this, and anti-Sisyphus actually helps on that front. Where like
I can imagine.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, so I'm constantly finding new language. Like the toy maker thing, I said something the other day. I was having a not an argument, but a very nice conversation with someone or other, and I ended up making because I've been using this metaphor of habitation and like
Okay.
it's to get at embodiment because games I think invite embodiment in a way that other artistic mediums don't necessarily,
Okay.
or rather they are predicated on embodiment in a way that other art forms are not, if that makes sense. Which is something we can maybe tackle in a second.
Sure.
But I use this habitation metaphor to get at it. This like games are a house kind of deal,
Mm-hmm.
and we live in the house. And so I ended up getting at. I think it was probably in the Discord. I sort of got to this place where it was like, no, like we're making hammers, right? And then players have to make the house, right? And so then
Yeah.
that got a lot.
Yeah.
That did a lot for communicating sort of how I conceive of these things and how they fit together.
So, real quick aside, the book you asked me to tell you how it was, this one,
Oh yeah.
you basically just described as close to a central thesis as I've gotten to yet in this book. So you might really like it.
Oh hell yeah.
So like that's like in the introductory chapter where he arrives at as his like thesis statement, basically. Um,
Yeah.
so yeah, I'll let you know if that continues being the case throughout the rest of the basically dissertation.
Hell yeah.
But yeah, I mean I get that. For most of my life I think I approached it the same way, and somewhere around undergrad I like my brain I think it was just like a lot of drugs and alcohol and it just flipped. And now like I'm really good at understanding the galaxy brain take, but I just work in a reverse order, so like I can explain shit to people who are not good at the galaxy brain take. Which is a pretty useful skill to have, I will say.
Yeah, that's great.
Um,
Yeah, 100%.
okay, so
My brand of rhetoric only works on people who already agree with me.
yeah, I mean, I don't know. It it depends on what you mean works.
Yeah, yeah, 100%. Yeah.
If you're trying to entertain people, well, you entertain me all the time. Um, if you're trying to convert people, yeah, okay, probably
Yeah.
true.
Yeah.
So, okay, quick aside, just so that I don't forget to do this because he paid good money for it.
Oh yeah, let's do it.
Our
Let's do it.
mutual friend Sean Richer backed your pledge level, paid $50 to ask you
What a
three
guy.
questions. Right? What a
Okay.
mensch. Um,
Hit me with him.
and you
Here
know
we
what?
go.
Since Sean's such a good guy, I'm also going to throw out. I had a broad topic section in the survey, so I'll throw that one out and we can talk about it maybe later if we want. His is just mostly just want to know whether creators would leave as soon as they felt they reached peak critical acclaim. Oh, that's
Wait,
gonna.
say that one more time for me. You kind of broke up in the middle.
Sorry. Mostly just want to know whether
Uh-huh.
creators would leave as soon as they felt they reached peak critical acclaim.
Oh, interesting.
That's actually a really interesting one. That's almost more interesting
Yeah.
than any of the actual questions he asked. But let's do the questions first, and then we'll go back to that one. So, First question for Jared. Do you own a Chemex or some fancy coffee thing like that?
I do not own a Chemex. I do own a Kalita Wave. I used to own both a 165 and a 185, the two sizes. But now I just have the 185. The thing about a Chemex is I don't like them very much. They're fine. They're fine. But if I'm going to do a pour over, I'm going to use a Kalita.
I mean,
By the way, everyone listening, I have worked in coffee my entire adult life, and Sean knows that, which is why he asked me that. So.
yeah, Jared, big coffee brain. And we'll talk about that. I do not have your nose or palate for it, but I consume a very great deal of it, and have thoughts. So we will talk about that. Second question, though, not a question, just a statement, and barely intelligible, if at all. Thanks, Sean. Quote, undercuts or riding an ostrich through the desert while shrieking the names of all who have ever loved a jet plane. End quote.
I am mildly afraid of ostriches, so to be honest with you, I'm going to go with undercuts on this one.
Okay, cool.
Yeah,
Undercuts.
That's the one. Undercuts are rad.
Yeah.
I used to, back when I was young and cool, I had an undercut.
Tight. See, I didn't even interpret that as a dichotomy.
Oh, oh, okay. I see. Maybe I read it wrong, but that's how I'm reading.
Who knows? You know what? If you've seen Sean shit, I've seen Sean shit. Who knows? Neither of us, for sure.
I said to Sean a million years ago when he was writing something and he was worried about it being too weird. And I said to him something like, let it get so weird it falls apart and show us the wreckage. Like, just do it.
You're basically the reason we got Neem.
I'm his enabler, yeah. I think that quote is in the front of Neem. Let me look. Hold on. Pause.
Okay.
I have it here. Let's see. Here's Neem, the weirdest RPG book I own. Congrats, Sean. And it's in the front of one of these books. It might be a different one. Yeah, anyway. What's the third one?
Third question is as follows. Will the game Jared, no quotes, no italics, nothing like that, get a prequel? Will it be Troika compatible? And will it be printed with a silk bookmark?
So, I do have a game named Jared the Role-Playing. Yeah, that's true. I do have a game named Jared the Role-Playing Game.
Okay.
It's getting long in the tooth at this point. It's been around for nearly a year. But it's will it have a prequel? See, it's very rooted in me being 31 at the time that I wrote it. So it could have a prequel about young me. But I don't think it... I mean, I don't know. Who knows what I'm going to write? Who fucking knows?
Could have a prequel about old you.
Yeah, that's true. Why not? Time is meaningless.
Yeah, fuck it.
Time is a flat circle.
Yeah.
Or whatever.
Whatever Matthew McConaughey said in that HBO show.
Yeah. But I've slowly been learning not to say I'm going to write anything ever. So I'm going to go with no prequel on this one.
There you go. All right. So in which case, neither of the second two questions matter. But good try on sneaking 5 into 3. Sean, appreciate that.
Really got his money's worth. Yeah. I hope that was good. I hope that was good.
So yeah, again, that is Sean Richer, our friend and general weirdo who makes weird shit. Now
what was the broad topic that Sean gave?
Yeah, so I want to go back to that. Again, quote, mostly just want to know whether creators would leave as soon as they felt they reached peak critical acclaim, end quote. And I emphasized would because I think it's a very different question than should.
100%. So, like, the glib answer is that some would and most would not, I think.
Sure.
Because it's complicated by the fact that you can't know that you're at critical, peak critical reception, totally. Right? So, like, you're always hoping there's more, and then inevitably you're going to fall off. but I think mostly it's not even that deep, right? People aren't just gonna leave praise on the table. I
Hmm.
think at least I wouldn't.
Yeah, no. The goal isn't to leave at the climax because you still can go so far down the hill before you actually hit what the rest of your life is going to look like. Um,
Yeah, 100%.
right?
You
Like
got to
I
ride those legs.
I could have like 4 or 5 years of downturn where I'm still getting more praise than I'm going to get for the next 40 years of my life. Um, I don't want to give up on that like primo like denouement praise. Um, I need that to sustain me for the rest of my completely lacking in praise life. Um,
Yeah, the twilight of my celebrity is still better
100%.
than no celebrity at all.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I say that, but also I love BoJack Horseman, and that's almost the complete opposite message of that show. So,
Oh, that's
um,
true. That show is kind of putting the lie to that, huh?
yeah, yeah. I don't know. I I think the answer might be a little different if people could know when they attained peak praise. Right? Like
Yeah,
if
like
you're,
if you could write it down on a piece of paper and
yeah.
I would know.
If my phone gave me a notification, like at some point in my life,
Yeah,
I
if you
knew
got a
my
push
phone
notification.
and it was just going to be like peak Prit is achieved, I'd be like, dope, time to move to the woods.
Yeah, like hell yeah, let me go buy an Airstream and like just do it up. You know,
Yeah,
like we're done.
we're
I'm
done.
JD Salinger now
Yeah,
or
this is
whatever.
good. Um, but unfortunately, you don't.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Huh.
good questions.
That's a good
I won't
question.
say
Yeah.
all around one good question and three others. Um, I love you, Sean. Anyway, so what else? What else do we want to talk about? I feel like there's way deeper we can go in this theory shit.
I mean, there always is.
There always is.
I haven't even said Heidegger's name yet.
That's true. You
Um,
haven't. Best Heidegger book.
yeah.
Go.
Oh, I only like one. I only
Which one?
like one Heidegger book, and it's not the one I'm supposed to like. I
Okay.
like The Origin of the Work of Art.
Really?
Yeah, I'm a Heidegger aesthetics guy.
Ah, true. You are a super big. You are an aesthetics and rhetoric guy to heart.
Rhetoric is my shit.
Rhetoric
Yes.
is your shit. Whereas I am
Yeah.
a being and time guy.
Yeah, that makes sense. I actually, it's funny because I like The Origin of the Work of Art specifically because it's doing aesthetics ontologically. It's doing an
Sure.
ontological aesthetics. Because mostly I think aesthetics is not a discipline for me. Like I'm very concerned with the same questions that aesthetics is
Mm-hmm.
concerned with. But I like most of it is really useless to me, which is how I ended up eventually at rhetoric, because I think rhetoric is much more useful for like answering those questions for the most part.
Generally
Answering
speaking.
almost any set of questions is probably like a rhetorical set of questions on some level and like a really good useful level.
I mean, on a
Um,
really useful level, definitely, but fundamentally, it's
yeah,
math.
I mean, okay, sure,
Now
sure.
you idiot, you fool! I have a recording of you saying yeah, sure. I'm gonna
That's
make a
true.
soundbite of that. That's gonna be all over the Discord all day, every day. Um,
It's all math now.
it's all
I
math
can't
now.
deny
You
it.
can't deny it. You admitted it on record. Um,
I've
wow,
never changed my mind before.
it's fair.
Never.
Never.
Wow.
There's a first time for
I'm locked
everything.
in. Yeah, I'm locked
Um,
in.
all right, cool. This has already become an infinitely better interview for me, at least, than I thought it was going to be.
Oh hell yeah.
So, okay, this is a weird question. It's like, I don't. I am always here for shit talk. I am always here for drama. I'm a thirsty bitch. I love that shit.
Sure.
But the flip side of it is, I really like hearing who people think are doing good work. Um, I do genuinely love hearing what people think is like good and interesting going on. Um, like top five theory or practice working in our space right now.
Okay. That's it's a tough one. That's tough. Five names.
Yeah.
Um, there's probably two names that I'm just gonna say right off the bat
Okay.
are Zedek, who we touched on earlier.
Mm-hmm.
I think I'm a total Zedek stan, and Evie
Lockhart.
Lockhart.
Yeah.
Yeah, Evie, I think, is doing some of the those two together are doing, I think, the most important work in the OSR right now.
Okay.
For my money,
Sure.
they're doing the best work out there. And maybe it's just because I just got Super Blood Harvest, but I am going to say Dirk here.
Dirk, I mean, is probably
Yeah,
from a purely aesthetic standpoint gonna break any reasonable top 10. Um,
yeah. And then I'm going to shout out specifically on a theory level
okay.
to, and this is not a person who's as known as the other three that I just named, but Natalie of Big Stuff Cat fame. I don't know
Is
if you
that
know Natalie. Natalie Libre.
yes.
Yeah.
I'm pretty sure she blocked
So
me.
yeah, that's standard.
Yeah,
That's to be expected to some
it's
degree.
just my life.
I'm blocked by so many people. I'm surprised I'm not blocked by half of the lyric games crowd. I think it's just like residual goodwill from LB Jam.
Certainly.
Yeah, definitely. But Natalie, I think, is the work they're putting out is like as thoughtful as anyone else's, if not more. And I think Natalie engages my bullshit probably more than anyone else. So there's
Okay.
a little bit of soft feelings on that front. But I think they're the one who's really like they understand what I'm saying when I say stuff. and like respond in kind.
You're not just like a beardy homeless dude just muttering to yourself all the time. Like there's one person who understands you are speaking intelligibly.
Exactly. Natalie actually like nominated themselves, and I totally agree, as the Jared ambassador to the rest of the world.
Nice.
So that's what 4, and I've got one more.
You got one
Who
more.
am I going to put as the last?
I feel
one?
like this is always the hardest one.
It really is.
Because you can do 4, and then you're like, oh shit, I used 4.
Yeah, it's a tough one.
If you want to keep going, keep going. I'm always here for shout outs. I don't care.
Well, okay, so I'm gonna shout out specifically. I think my number 5 today.
Okay.
And these could all change tomorrow, but today my number 5 is Ben of Swords and Flowers fame.
Okay.
I think Ben has like a really excellent like grounded approach to the kinds of things that I'm interested in, if that makes sense.
Totally, 100%.
So Ben is a person that as a person embedded in the OSR who also does and is somehow embedded in lyric games also, I end up being like the de facto lyric games ambassador to the OSR. And I get a lot of messages. I get a lot of messages from people asking like, what is this lyric game shit? I don't get it. And so Ben's stuff is a very common place that I send people first. Mm-hmm. And so I think that alone is enough of an endorsement to get Sword and Flowers on there. Yeah, so there's 5. That's nice. 5.
That's a solid
I'm sorry
list.
To everyone that I didn't say. You all deserve to be on the list, but that's who I said first.
I mean, not everybody. Like, I mean, I'm gonna let you roll that back, because right now you just said, hey, you know what? Top 5, Macris and Varg totally believe they should be up there, and are right.
Not everyone.
Not everyone.
Definitely not everyone.
So, yeah, a lot of you though. So
yeah.
Favorite modules, top 5. I think I know these already, but for like public record.
You might know some of them. Crypts of Endormancy.
Yeah.
Is probably my favorite module right now. For a variety of reasons, both emotional and political. I love Crypts of Endormancy. Slumberingers and Dunes.
Really?
Yeah, I'm obsessed with it.
Didn't think
Hill Cantons broadly, but that's very much in my wheelhouse. That like tone of thing is what I do. ASE, anomalous subsurface environment.
Yeah.
Subterranean environment.
No, subsurface.
It is subsurface. Yeah. Keep on the Borderlands.
Sure.
And forgive me, I'm putting 2 Gygax modules on here. Expedition to Barrier Peaks.
Barrier Peaks.
Yeah. Barrier Peaks. I love it.
Okay.
It's a mess. It's a glorious mess. I love
Yeah,
it.
no, it's uh, that's S3, right?
Yes.
Yeah,
Yes.
weird one.
Yes. Yeah.
That's
It's a
that's
very strange one. It's huge.
it's
And I don't think
huge.
people realize how big it is. Yeah, it's really huge. It's
Also, like
almost
how
Megadon.
fucking weird it is.
Uh-huh. Very strange.
It
And
like,
it does a lot of video. It prefigures a lot of video game things.
hmm
Like it has the key cards, which is interesting.
hmm
But I think the key cards are actually more interesting than they get used in video games.
totally. I mean, it is.
Yeah,
It's this weird historical artifact because it's Gygax saying, "Oh shit! Well, I have these games. I guess I'll mash them together."
uh-huh.
Making Metamorphosis Alpha part of the D&D canon. Um,
Yeah.
so
My
yeah.
favorite thing, my favorite thing in S3 is the laser guns.
hmm
Do you know what I'm talking about?
Yeah.
What they look like?
Yeah.
Because he couldn't make them look like guns because he didn't want players to know what they were immediately when they found them
Yep.
because the characters wouldn't have known,
hmm
right? And so there needs to be like an investigative element to it. So they look like TVs on weird handles.
Yeah.
They look so goofy and bad,
They're so
and I
dumb.
love them. I love them. So yeah, Barrier Peaks. I think those are my five right now.
Okay.
It pains me that I didn't say Lauren Song. I think Lauren Song is like one of the most important. It pains me I didn't say Wet Grandpa. But there you go. Those are like easy honorable mentions that might have been on the list. What are you smiling about?
Sean just said, "I am listening and ever present."
Of course he is. Hi, Sean.
I'm a little surprised Hamlet wasn't on that list.
Yeah, it's always Keep or Hamlet, and
Okay.
I think Keep slightly edges out Hamlet at this moment. I might flip on that next month,
I get it.
but yeah.
Um, we're only
I think
we're
Keep gets into faction play better than Hamlet does, which is what I'm really
sure.
down for. Yeah.
Um, oh, this is gonna be a fun one. Top five systems.
Well, I am on the record as saying that there are only three systems:
Well, then what are they?
um, White Hack, Troika, Traveler.
So 1977, you have one system, beginning of RPGs. Nothing happened before it. Then you have nothing until the mid 2010s, and two more systems come out.
Yeah, you got it.
I like this revised history.
Oh, here's the thing I'll say about system while we're here, and sort of specifically in the OSR space, because those are my three OSR systems,
Sure.
right? Um, the thing about here's a controversial thing I'll say. I think I prefer OD&D clones to BX clones.
Okay.
That's where I'm at in my life, and I've that's sort of against the grain to some. I mean, in a really innocuous way to the rest of the OSR that's kind of just glommed onto BX as a thing.
Yeah, I mean they love it.
But
It's their shit.
yeah, and BX is BX. It's fine, but I
It's
do
fine.
prefer OD&D clones. I'm really into Untold Adventures right now. If I'm gonna
Okay.
play straight up like this shit is D&D, I'm
hmm
probably gonna play Untold Adventures. It does the thing that I've been joking about for years, which is there should be two classes: Swords Boy and Magic Man. Those are your options, and it actually does it. I made that joke at some point, and Brian was like, that game exists, right? So yeah, it's really clever in a couple of unexpected ways. I stole they have a gear rating, like an equipment rating in that game, and you can kind of, when you need a piece of equipment, you can tick it down.
Okay.
And then when you go back to town, you can spend 25 gold and replenish it back to 5 or whatever it was. So I stole that for my recent 6E game.
That's just like a
I
resource
fussed with
die,
it.
though, right?
I mean, kind of. I did it different for 6E, where every class has a different number of gear bubbles, and you can fill them in to have an item. You know what I mean?
Okay.
And so it's tied to your playbook in the one that I designed. So that's kind of slightly different.
Yeah.
But that's the first time I've seen that done it quite that way in an OSR system, and I was like really impressed with it because it's been around a little while. Most
Yeah.
OSR systems don't really bother; they just give you an equipment list. But
Yeah. Well, I mean, because again, this is something that I had to explain to my friend Daniel Kwan has a pod called Anything But D&D. and I was like the first person on it, and I did an overview of what the OSR was because like I don't know why I'm the most OSR person he knows. I am not that OSR at all. I am like really not that OSR. Sorry, Bubbles is really upset. Bubbles is my
Hi,
dog.
Bubbles.
But I was going through and I had to explain like when people say OSR, they are like very specifically talking most of the time of clones of like a 3 year period of time.
Uh-huh.
And like outside of that, they just don't. Um, and it's like it's slowly expanded, but like most of the history is really just like what happened like 77 to 81.
Yep.
Let's do that.
I mean, you could roll it back a little bit to 74 at most, but
Sure,
I don't think
with OD&D clones.
OD&D clones never really, except for Swords and Wizardry, never
Yeah,
really did much anyway. You know what I mean?
Osric.
Like White Star, Osric is 1E.
Oh yeah,
Osric is 1E. So like the OD&D clones that come to mind are like Swords and Wizardry White Box and
yeah.
Swords and Wizardry Complete broadly. And then like White Star and FMAG, fantastic medieval adventure game. It's White Box, fantastic medieval adventure game,
Okay.
which is identical. Let's be real, that is identical to Swords and Wizardry White Box.
Yeah.
Like almost word for word. So like that's kind of it. White Star had a moment, and then Stars Without Number came out and killed it, I think.
Yeah, because I mean, I feel like Stars of the Number basically, until Mothership came around, killed space-based OSR. It like
Yeah,
if you were
100%.
interested in that, you just played Stars Without Number.
It was just Stars Without Number, which is like, I like White Star actually.
Of course,
I really like
of
White
fucking
Star.
course you
Yeah.
do. It's the most Jared ass statement. Another thing that probably you haven't heard of that like was around until the big popular thing killed it. I prefer it.
Yeah. Yeah, hipster. Thanks.
Yeah, fair. No, totally.
Yeah, it happened.
How do you feel about like the? I don't want to say a recent trend. I don't know if it actually is recent or just like recently observed of like trying to find what like an Arnisonian role playing game would be.
Oh yeah, we should talk about this. Okay, so I love it. It's my favorite thing, and I hope it's real.
Okay.
Like I hope it doesn't die. You know what
Sure.
I
Yeah,
mean?
yeah, yeah.
Because it could. It's got a really
I thought
tenuous
for a
position.
second I thought you meant you hoped everyone wasn't gaslighting you, and I was like, "Whoa, Jared, buddy! Like I know you have some trust issues, but that's a little far."
Yeah, no, I'm in love with it.
Okay.
So it's I am accidentally, I think, kind of part of it now because I made What's So Cool About Outer Space, and then realized afterward that it's basically that same kind of attitude. I yeah, I'm really into it because I think that's a really good expression of one way, not the only way, but one way of realizing game design as something that happens prior to play, right? It really is focused on play, and it doesn't do any, well, done to its fullest, it doesn't do anything that isn't in service of play, right?
Sure.
And it's very getting out of the way of that. And so it's just I think it's super refreshing, especially right now in the OSR. I think it's super refreshing because there has been, at least, maybe this is me just being unnecessarily alarmist, but
No,
I think
please.
there's been a small push in the OSR towards system. In the last couple of years, say the last few years,
I don't
I'm
think you're wrong
seeing
at
a lot.
all.
Yeah, so like, I mean, as much as I love Troika, that's part of it. Into the Odd is part of it. You know what I mean? These systems that are not immediately compatible with the extant, like BX systems, popping up, and you see products. I won't name any names at this juncture, but you see like products that could have been a setting or an adventure that come with this like vestigial system attached to it that I don't care for. I understand why they do it. It sort of legitimizes the product in the mind of some consumers, I guess, maybe.
It's so that's the weirdest fucking thing to me because I know the adoption rates of new systems, right? I know
It's
how
zero.
it's basically zero, right? It takes
Yeah, it's
so
zero.
much to convince anyone to adopt a new system. And yet there is this pervasive lie, this just unbelievable falsehood that like in order for your thing to be legitimate it needs to do the one thing that's going to drop its like eventual use case to zero over like the shortest possible period of time. Um,
And this is where I get to be a little bit of an ideologue, but I do think that's like an outcropping of the systems focused impulse that I was talking about earlier, right? Conceiving of system as somehow um, constitutive of play, right, rather than prior to. And I think that sort of ethos is the same ethos that makes you think that having a system in your product is somehow more legitimate than not,
yeah.
right? Especially in the OSR, because OSR lives inside of adventures and settings. Like that's what it is, and that's why I'm in the OSR. Is because it does elide system. Like system in the OSR is just a bunch of integers that we all know how they work and is sort of a lingua franca, and we don't have to think about it too much, and so we get to do the fun stuff, like the more interesting stuff. Um, and anyway, that's something that I did want to mention is like this moving towards systems in the OSR. I think it's partly story games rubbing off on us,
Yeah, I mean,
and
it was kind
um,
of the inevitable when we did the right thing. I think broadly was from a social perspective of kind of allowing something like Sword Dream to emerge and close some of those gaps and open up some lines of discourse that were badly needed. This was something that was
100%.
inevitably going to come out of that.
Yeah, I think so too. And I think it was happening before that. Like this is something that we were just talking about Kevin Crawford about Stars Without Number. That's Kevin Crawford's bread and butter, and the man has made, for all intents and purposes, a whole lot of money
Mm-hmm.
doing it that way. So like, don't listen to me. But I don't know. It's a sadness to me to see sort of that become more and more expected, I guess.
Yeah,
It seems like one more thing a designer has to do in order to put a book out.
so I was
Um,
as you were talking. There's something I was just so Jeff Engelstein, who is much more known on the board game side of things than on the role playing game side of things, did a
I'm very
book.
familiar with Jeff's work. Yeah,
Cool. So the book he did last year, Building Blocks of Tabletop Game Design and Encyclopedia of Mechanisms. Um, I really just want a role playing game version of that. I want like a
that seems like something you would want.
yeah.
Yeah.
I just want like a 600-page book that gives me every mechanic that's ever been used and tells me where it's been used and then
Mhm.
just let me play make pretend and I get to go through the book and pick the ones that make the most sense for me.
I'm kind of down for that. Like, you know very well that I'm super definition averse.
Sure.
Um, but I do think that would be a reasonable thing. That's actually a very anti-Sisyphus thing to do, now that I think about it. That's kind of the project of the first two issues of Anti-Sisyphus in a
Mm-hmm.
way, in a glib way. But but yeah, I would be interested in that. I've actually thought about how cool it would be to do a more like OSR focused version of that and have like, here's all the ways you can handle inventory, here's all the ways you can handle stats, here's all the ways you can do, encumbrance and combat and whatever else,
Yeah.
and almost have like a menu, like a pick and choose, like build your own adventure type,
Totally. Like we have
like
so many books on setting design and adventure design and like all this shit. And like that's cool. That's rad. I don't think we need any more, right? Like I think you can basically just mash them all together and you've got more words than you'd ever possibly need on like how to make a module. Just give me that for like mechanics. I don't
yeah,
want
and that
you
would be good even for people like me who don't want to have to provide, or I don't want to say provide. I would love to provide, right? I'm all about providing options to players,
sure.
but it's a lot of work to do that.
It
In
is.
addition to whatever else I would like to do, and so to be able to just like have this free floating pool of things and be able to point players to it and say like, "Yo, choose one." Here's maybe what I would do, but like there it is. That seems really good. Yeah,
So
I'm increasingly sold on this.
one of the things that I keep thinking, and this might be different from your feelings on the subject, but at least for me, the reason why I have a problem with system matters as a broad philosophy isn't that I don't think mechanics matter, right? Like I do fundamentally believe that the way you mechanize or choose not to mechanize a thing has an impact on play to some degree. Um, I don't like the authorial importance it imparts upon the game designer by making the choice of it.
Yeah, that's basically exactly my whole system, and or my whole like statement. I get accused of being like system doesn't matter, but actually, I am on the record as saying that in terms of system matters
Mm-hmm.
discourse, which is the like only thing really commonly available to game designers as a method or a thing. Like there is nothing outside of that right now in
Sure.
design. Um, they that in those terms, system absolutely does matter, right? That there's no way around it. And so my project is not to say that system doesn't matter. My project is to say how might we construct a game design in which system doesn't matter, right? How
Sure.
do we ask a different question? And I think that's a very different project that's difficult for me at least to communicate to people
I mean,
in a way that doesn't sound like everything you do is bullshit, because I don't think that's true.
I think it's difficult to grasp, even, right?
It
Like,
might be, yeah.
I think it creates this, like, category of possibility that people just don't really think of as existing until you kind of push their head down into it and make them see that it is there. Um,
Yeah, and there's like I'm finally at the point, and keep in mind, I have only been doing this for like a year.
yeah,
So I am baby. And I think the way I don't know, I have a particular way of conducting myself that probably makes people invest some trust in my authority than like
sure.
more than they should. But I only now feel like I'm starting to do the kind of game design that sort of begins to demonstrate the theoretical concerns that I have.
Okay,
This gets us back to our theory and practice divide from earlier,
sure.
um, because I was having this conversation recently as well, where I um, I get accused of doing like pie in the sky whiteboard theory quite a lot,
Hmm.
which I understand why, and it's not a complaint. Like by all means, drag me, daddy, you know, like whatever. But I that's definitely not true for me. I do theory post hoc as a way of justifying my like my impetus to work, right?
Sure.
It's very much a I've done this thing. Why did I do this? And then I use theory in order to get a closer look at what it was exactly that I did, so that I can maybe do it again or do it differently or do it better. And I don't think that's a cycle that exists on a very long time scale. And I think we're just starting to come back around to like, okay, I've spent enough time in the theory hole that it's starting to show up in my work again. And so the most recent things I've made, specifically What's So Cool About Outer Space and 6E, I think are really good example. Like Natalie, actually, who I mentioned earlier, made the claim that 6E is just anti-Sisyphus without the discourse. And I think that's probably true.
And that's
Um,
a hell of a pitch.
yeah, absolutely. And I mean, whatever. It's a pretty small, like both of them are pretty small slide games, especially What's So Cool About Outer Space. But I do think they're at least illustrative of the thing that I'm on about all the time. If you look for it, I think it's easy to miss because I'm not. I don't know. I'm doing my best. You know what I mean?
Sure.
But it's there.
So I think, and we've certainly talked about both of the things that I'm gonna say, but I feel like we've mostly been talking about one of them, and I want to ask about the other.
Mm,
And
okay.
those two things are where we'd like to see the hobby go, and where the hobby is going.
I mean, okay. So I don't have a super long view of the hobby. Most of the things I know about the hobby prior to a year or two ago is like, I don't know, I read it in a history book, you know.
Sure. Most people
Um,
that you know that
yeah,
you're already enough in it to know the turnover in this business. Um, there aren't
yeah,
too many people who have the long view.
yeah. Um, so as far as like, I mean, if we want to frame it as trends that I like and don't like, is that close to what you're asking?
Yeah, kind of. Yeah, I guess that's a form of it.
Okay. I mean, we did kind of touch on, I don't like the OSR going more systems
Mm-hmm.
forward, or like assuming that systems should be there at all times
Sure.
in every product. That's not to say like don't make your OSR system by all means, like
Yeah.
whatever. I'm a systems head. Um, what's another one? I think here's one I like. I really like the move toward books. I think there's a lot of people, a lot more printing of books happening now than have seen maybe previously. And I don't mean necessarily like, I think there's a move away from POD and
Oh,
into like,
a move back to offset print runs, basically.
yes, that's
Okay.
maybe the better way to the long view way of saying it.
Sure.
The way it looks to me as a person who's only been here a little while
Yeah.
is that we're making books, you know, finally.
Sure.
Um, but I am really, I think there's a lot of like bigger small companies cropping
Mm-hmm.
up, people the size of Melsonia and Soul Muppet, you know, that are focused on printing books.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's really good. I like books. I have an English degree. Like that's part of who I am on some level. So I really appreciate that. And I think conversely, I'm also very stoked on how easy it is to publish a PDF, right? Itch is a
Mm-hmm.
good thing. Um, I wouldn't exist in on the game scene without Itch. And if it were any harder to use, like if it were any more confusing to use Itch, I wouldn't be an RPG person. You know, like that's the circumstances of me being here. And so I'm really happy about that and the fact that the culture is, we'll be a little bit cynical and say that the culture is still, as of right now, super accepting of ugly PDFs because that's what I make, right? Especially historically, like when I first
Yeah.
started, it was like the way Libre Baskerville Jam came about is I made a very true statement about the way my like process, which is I open a Google Docs, I set the font to Libre Baskerville, and I start typing. And whenever I stop, the game is done, and I press export as PDF. Like that was the joke I made, but it was also true. Like that's a very real thing
Yeah.
in my life at the time. Now I have like affinity and whatever else, and I do, you know, layout, I guess. But if that were not possible at the time, and specifically if it weren't something that people were willing to pay some small amount of money for,
Mm-hmm.
um, I would be at least a very different figure in the scene, if not a figure at all.
Sure.
So I'm really happy with that, and I'm glad that it's still the case. And I'm glad that we can have both. You know what I mean? Like
Mm-hmm.
we can have books, and we can also have easy bullshit PDFs. Just like don't worry about it, put it on the internet. Both are really good. I'm also, I do have to say this. I don't like blogs, and I don't want to see any blogs any
Wow.
time of the day. I
For a
don't like.
person who has spent a lot of time talking about them and their relationship to the OSR, that is a hell
I
of a
know
statement.
that is the thing is I have only been here for a year, and that is I came right as Google Plus was imploding. I came, you know what I mean? So like it's all up in the air for me. I only have Twitter. And I showed up right around the time that all the OSR people were going from Google Plus to Twitter.
Yeah.
Um,
Which is a
but yeah,
weird. It was
blogs,
a weird period.
me hating blogs is kind of a meme at this point, but I do have problems with blogs, and I think people use them in a way to like not have to, like it lets them half publish something. You know what I mean? Like they can just kind of put it up and not have to confront the fact that it's real. And it's like, no, it's real. make it a PDF and publish it. Like, put it on itch, please. I'm begging you. You know, you're worthwhile. You're worth it. Please. Because this is going to be gone. My experience with blogs is I show up at a blog and it's like a giant list of links pointing to other blogs and every one of them is dead.
They're all broken.
I hate it.
Yeah.
They're all broken links. And it's just useless. It's useless. And it puts things in reverse chronological order, which is exactly the opposite of good.
Yep.
And nobody indexes well. And then people come to me and they're like, Jared, they could index it well and they could tag well. And it's like, yeah, they could.
They could. They're not gonna.
They don't. I've never seen one well-tagged indexed blog in my whole life.
I mean, like,
so, just don't do it. Use a better platform.
A few maintained by, like, librarians.
Yeah, absolutely.
Like, that's
100%. Yeah. Anyway, so that's my anti-blog speech. I don't want to see any blogs.
No. Okay, that's a good one. I'll throw one out there just in case you'd forgotten about it. Bullet points. Feelings on bullet points.
I do hate bullet points. I don't hate bullet points. I do. This is another one that's basically meme status at this point. I think bullet points are great for certain kinds of information, and they are not great for other kinds of information. And something like, you're seeing, I'm not going to name names. I'm going to like really be good. But there's been a lot of adventures that are like adventures and systems now that are just all bullet points all the way down. You certainly know what I'm talking about. I think anyone in the OSR at this point knows what I'm talking about. And they get a lot of praise, and I don't understand why, because I cannot run those. I open up the book and, like, say there's a room, right? It's a fucking dungeon. There's a room. What I need to know is what's going on in the room, right? What I don't need to know is what color the walls are, that there's a rock in the corner. I don't need to know. Like, I just need to know who's in there and what they're doing, right? So that the rest of it is, like, basically bullshit. So the problem with bullet points is they don't tell me that. I have to read this big, long list of bullet points to even get a sense of what's going on in the room, when they could have just said, there's a human sacrifice going on in here, right? They could have written literally like a 7-word sentence. But I have to get to bullet point number 13 to read it.
Yeah.
So anyway, I'm a fan of bullet points used well. Think about this shit. You know what I mean? Like, don't just categorically make everything bullet points is always what.
I often think of the common use of bullet points, and I say common because there are people who have figured to a better extent out how to. Sorry, Nate just showed up in chat and said, "Okay, I'm here. Let's start over." You missed like 70 minutes of this, dude. I'm sorry. No. There are people who use bullet points well.
Oh yeah, 100%.
But a lot of times what you get is like somebody took a wall of text, right? Like the classic 1980s, 1990s example of how you don't write a module. And then instead of taking the appropriate lesson from that and saying, well, let me pare back the text and then reorder it so that it's usable, they simply said, yeah, but if I just hit enter between every line and put a bullet point, it's fine.
It's really not.
And it's just not.
It's really not, yeah. Bullet points are a thing. I think, like I said, there's certain kinds of information that do it well. Mm-hmm. I always point to Crypts of Endormancy for this, and I know I talked about it earlier, but...
I mean, you mentioned it. You didn't talk about it. You
that's right. I just said the name.
That. Yeah. Like, please, so, like, go.
So, like, Crypts is a really good example of an adventure that, like, ideologically is against bullet points. It has a very... I don't like to say a high Gygaxian kind of prose style, but that's what it's doing. It's making fun of that to some degree. And also, you know what? It's like it's evoking that era of adventure design. Mm-hmm. I think, like, that's my reading of it.
I mean, I've always had a satirical reading of it.
Yeah, there's a very satirical, but also, like, very serious sort of agenda on that front.
If we're gonna get fancy, it's more of a Horatian satire than it is a Juvenalian satire.
Okay, absolutely. You did it, not me. So the thing about Crypts of Endormancy is people complain about that thing about it, right? It has highly elevated diction. It is written in long sentences with fairly complex sentence structures. It is single column layout. You know what I mean? Like it is not going out of its way for any information design stuff. But it is, for me, an adventure that when I read it through one time, exactly one time, I could have run it without the book. It's so, um, I hate the word evocative, but there you go. It's so evocative
Hmm.
and like specific in a way that isn't boring or useless. That that book lives inside of me somewhere now, and I could legit, it wouldn't be perfect, but I could run it without the book, and I can definitely run it with the book sitting beside me
Hmm.
easily with no study. Whereas if you give me something, one of these like obstinately bullet point adventures, um, I know that people say that they can not even read it and just open it up and run. I do not understand how. And like power to you, I cannot do that.
There are
I
very
could read, I could read through a bullet point adventure 4 times and still not feel comfortable reading it because they're just like all of the information is equally presented as exactly as important as every other piece of
sure.
information, right? Whereas in a paragraph, I know that the first and last sentences are what's important, right? It's like inside my soul that this information is ranked and it's communicated through the prose, what's important and kind of what's less important. You put something in parentheses, like that kind of deal. You can get across that kind of information. But bullet points are just like a fucking AK of everything is relevant being shot at you at all times. And I just can't parse it very easily. Especially when half the bullet points are like, there's a pink rock. And it's like, I don't care that there's a pink rock.
Yeah.
Why did you tell me there's a pink rock?
Yeah. There. I will say there is. Zarkov did something interesting with his most recently released product, which is basically a bullet point thing. Um, in that he
What's
tried
it
to
called?
something ghoul prints,
Oh, I don't know
crypt of
this.
the
I
ghoul
really like
prints.
Zarkov's work.
It's like the brand new thing Zarkov did. Um, and it's how do you create a dungeon template that can be ported into any geographical region. Um, so everything is like keyed beasts, lock chests, art. Um, and then there is a 2-page list that you keep out on the table, and every time it keys to one of those, you just go, art, okay, it's stone paintings because it were in the barrow setting. Um, and it is just like a completely stripped and programmatic adventure. And it's
that is, I love that. That is the most Zarkov thing I've
yeah,
ever heard in my
it's
life.
it's really neat. And the thing is,
Yeah, that's like some effort justification bullshit that I would never do, but
yeah,
like I'm into it.
and I mean, I use it by way of example to say that like I think bullet points stand on the opposite end of the kind of evocative narrative design that you're writing. Like, could I put I6 in bullet points? Right? Could I put Ravenloft in bullet points? Totally. Would it work? Would it be good? Absolutely not. Because what's good
Is that
about
the best or most efficient way to communicate that particular module? No.
no. And in fact, it would
No.
probably remove much of what is good about that module, which is how evocative it is in the way that it is framed and put out.
Yeah, so much of bullet points is about eschewing tone and like eschewing narrator voice, authorial voice. You know what I mean? Like
Sure.
it's very difficult. And you look at something like talk about authorial voice and bullet points. You look at Silent Titans.
Hmm.
Um, like that's all authorial voice. That's Patrick Stewart.
It's
Like
all Pat does.
that's
Yeah.
what he does. That's his whole thing, is voice. And then sort of cramming that into bullet points. It feels very strange to me. Like it feels there's a big disconnect between what the text is trying to do and how it presents itself, if that makes sense.
Sure.
Um, yeah, absolutely. And so I feel like there's an impersonality to bullet points that doesn't quite jive with something like Crypts of Endormancy or Ravenloft or ultimately like most of what Patrick Stewart is writing.
Hmm. And I think
because they're so present as authors, right?
there's a market for, let's call it the depersonalized module, right?
Mm,
That is
yeah.
a useful tool that many GMs, a lot of time people who buy shit to run do not want your like headcanon fascinating adventure. They want some shit that's gonna make running for their friends easier, and then they're gonna riff off of it.
And this is something, this gets back into my whole ideologue like system matters shit, but that's something I wholly respect.
Mm-hmm.
I am all about getting out of the way of players and not like forcing your whatever tone or lore or whatever it is that you have to force upon players, like not forcing it upon them. I'm down. Um, where I think Crypts of Endormancy is the example I go to so often. I think the reason why is the book, by virtue of being the way that it is, and that like Haydn prose and the whole thing, it sort of forces you to wrestle with it. You're always like, as a person reading it who's going to run it, you're immediately at odds with it to some degree,
Sure.
and so there's two ways to react to that as a reader, right? And one is, well, I guess I just have to wrestle with this until I get it right, which I think is not a useful way of doing business. It's just a recipe to have no fun at all. And then the other way is to say, okay, this module is doing a thing. I kind of like what it's doing insofar as I understand it. So I'm just going to run with that. And I think that is exactly what Crypt of Endormancy does best. It really preps you for that kind of running, right? That kind of play.
Sure.
In a really sly way. Like it doesn't say that. It's not written in the introduction. You know what I mean? Whereas something like a bullet point adventure, while on its face, does do what we're talking about, right? It does get out of the way of the players to bring their own like tone or whatever to the thing. I don't feel like it offers very much as far as support for that or options a lot of the time. Like some of them, it could. It's not inherent to bullet points.
Sure.
But like you think about a really vanilla bullet point adventure, I think having a tone present in an adventure is a useful thing, especially if the tone is a little bit frenetic and like shifting anyway, which it does in Crypts of Endormancy. It gives you options to choose from. It's a bit like having a list of like cool things to do on your character sheet, right? It's not telling you have to do those things.
So, I think
but you can.
That's a very apt comparison because I think it comes down to your comfortability with your creativity and your imagination. Mm-hmm. And there are a lot of players who simply are not and want
100%.
And for whom I think this type of evocative product with a voice is actually difficult for them. Or no, sorry, flip that. For whom the depersonalized adventure is difficult for them for this reason.
Yeah, because like it's just going to be boring because that's all that's there. 100%. I think so too. And that's not to say, and I get accused of this very often. Mm-hmm. I'm not saying that one method is necessarily like better than another, and I don't want to elide the fact that some people are going to find one of those things more useful than the other. But I think that this conversation that we're having about it is something that we don't say to each other. Sure. And that's a problem, right?
Yeah.
We need to have these ideas in our minds when we sit down to write a thing so that we know who we're serving and how we're serving them, right? And it just feels very haphazard at the moment where I think this is a moment where we could be better as designers and as writers.
I agree with wholeheartedly, right?
Yeah.
There are certainly finer points of things we've discussed so far that I don't think I understand your standpoint, and I find parts of it agreeable and other parts not, but I'm like wholly in agreement with the concept that like basically if you're going to make a work, you need to have intentionality be like at every stage in lots of different ways, and it's just usually not there yet.
For some works, like we're talking specifically in terms of adventures that you intend to publish so that other people will play them.
Sure.
Right? And in that context, whereas like I've written
you can make
all kinds
whatever
of
the hell you want for yourself.
Yeah, and I've written plenty of things that shouldn't or can't or could or maybe they actually can't be played, right? And that's
Mm-hmm.
fine. And I don't take those things into consideration for those necessarily,
Sure.
right?
Well,
It's
I mean,
very, you know,
well, I mean, this is, I can't say one way or another, but I would suspect, given who you are, that there is a degree of intentionality when you're putting something out there and going, well, this isn't going to be playable, or well, this isn't for that purpose, right? And that is still
it's sort of,
intentionality.
yeah, it's kind of a post hoc intentionality. I with the art games, right? The lyric games or whatever it is that I do,
Sure.
the things that look or feel more like when I wrote poetry, right? So I
Mm-hmm.
had a process for writing poetry, and there are times when I'm writing games where I'm using a very similar process where, and this is LB Jam shit. This is art comes from the outside.
Mm-hmm.
There is no such thing as intention, right? You're a transmitter receiving messages from Mars, like all of that stuff, and all of that's very much true for me in writing these things in the moment of actually writing it.
Mm-hmm.
But there is a post hoc intentionality between the moment that I write it and like read it again
Mm-hmm.
and decide if I'm going to publish it. Like, am I
Sure.
ever going to show this to another human? Or do I need
I
to
mean,
change it? Or
in,
do I need
in
to put it in the shredder?
intentionality is often editorial, right?
Yeah. So there is
Um,
an editorial intentionality to that, definitely.
um,
Um, yeah.
and I think that's
And
actually probably where a lot of intentionality comes into play for adventure writers as well, right? Like maybe there's somebody out there being like Proust, mapping out the entirety of Swan's Way, right? Like figuring out all that shit in advance, and then just like it seems like a dream sequence, but actually it's just an incredibly dense web. Right? Like I don't think that's most people though. I'm sure somebody out there does it that way, but like
that's certainly, I'm certainly not a fan of that method of working for me because on an ideological level, if I could have planned it, it's probably pretty fucking boring,
sure,
right? I don't have good ideas. You know what I mean? Or if I did, they're like only as good as I am.
yeah.
Whereas if I allow something to be discovered, if I just like
Mm-hmm.
trek out into the unknown and find something and bring it back, I think there's a lot more potential for something really remarkable to happen.
Mm-hmm.
And that's hard. It requires just as much work in the end because when you bring the thing back, then you have to clean it up.
100%.
You have to
But
like
I think like
you have to make sense of it yourself. But
my point is that the kind of editorial intentionality that you were describing for your lyric games is what I suspect is the kind of intentionality that ends up being in most adventures. Um,
I agree. Yeah,
and I think we
100%. Yeah.
simply need more of it, right? I don't think you need
Mhm.
to
We need
front
to be
load it.
better at it.
Yeah, we need to
Yeah.
be better at it. It needs to be more considered. Um, if you know this is the reason you are putting out the product so that somebody else can use it in a pretty specific way, then you need to think
Mhm.
about what usability means. Um,
Yeah. And I don't think there's a one size fits all solution. And I do
no,
think that's how bullet points are getting treated right now.
yes,
That's my ultimate thesis.
agreed.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. I'm that was yeah, I feel good about that bullet points conversation
yeah, that
because
was.
I I get a lot of shit about bullet points. But yeah, no, I think that's a pretty clear expression of where I'm at on bullet
I
points.
agree. I think that was good. So question from the chat that I'm not entirely sure the meaning, but I'm gonna go right off of what it says. Thoughts on word clouds?
Word clouds. Hmm.
I'm
I'm
thinking
I'm
like
not certain.
I'm thinking like comic book word bubbles. They're cool.
See, I in my mind it was like you know those internet things where you take a book and then it lists all the words in
Oh,
the book all
yeah.
artsy and the ones that it uses more are bigger. Is
Yep.
that
Maybe like linguistic variance.
maybe?
Like I'm a big
I guess the answer to the question is I don't have a lot a lot of thoughts on word clouds because
clouds.
I'm
Yeah,
not certain what
what
word
word clouds
clouds.
are. I will say if we are going with that second one, huge fan. And
I think they're cool. Yeah.
I like them a lot. I also really like studies of like linguistic variability within the work of an artist. Um, so like one of my favorite musicians is Aesop Rock, who is like pretty widely known for just like being such a far on the outside outlier in terms of like linguistic variance in his raps that like you just chart that for like every extant rapper and then he's just like kind of off the chart. And like that ends
Oh,
up,
I see. So you're doing like big data analysis on
yeah,
a word by word basis. Okay, yeah, yeah. That makes
um,
sense.
which is a big study that was done, I want to say like 2 years ago. Um,
Huh.
which was neat, and like a lot of the people you expected to like score really really high were there. KRS-One, um, Madville, and MF Doom. But like ASAP Rock was just like all the way over. Um, so yeah, I think they're cool.
Oh,
Anyway,
cool.
we are at 90 minutes. I feel like we could. This is because we talk all day, like every
Yeah.
day. I know this is like absolutely nothing compared to like where
Yeah,
we can go.
if there's no more questions in the chat, I think we had some really good conversations, you
Yeah,
know.
I agree. I think this is. I might, if during the next your interview 10, I have at a minimum 21 more of these to do if I don't
Oof.
add anybody else. Um, if something interesting happens in that period of time, I would very much like to have you on for a second episode so we could talk about whatever interesting shit occurred. Um, but I'll leave that up
Yeah,
to
hit
you.
me up whenever.
Yeah,
Yeah, I'm down.
cool.
You know where to find me.
I too. I'm gonna message you on where to find you in like
Yeah,
4 minutes. Um, anyway, I don't know. Enjoy. Have a good time. Play some Runeterra tonight. Chill out. Thank you for this.
absolutely. Yeah, we'll see you soon.
Yeah.
Thanks for having me, and goodbye to everyone who is here and listened.
Bye all. Thanks for listening.